Good morning. Thank you for joining us again. Hope your week's getting off to a good start. So this Tuesday morning, grab your Bible and let's go back to the 25th Psalm, and we'll be picking up there in the fourth verse. Kind of broke apart in a little bit of a bad place yesterday, but I think we will survive. Again, David is this psalm is again one that David is dealing with some issues, some problems in his life. Many of them, I think, the problems largely were being caused were the result of his sin with Bathsheba. Again, down in down in the psalm, he asks God to not remember his transgressions or the sins of his youth. And so it appears that David is, as we say, reaping what he had sown. And so we're seeing how he deals with this struggle, this crisis in his life, and it gives us some ideas of some things, how we can deal with issues and problems that arise in our life. And so again, we'll be picking up in verse 4. David, again, in the first three verses, has shown us, again, kind of a no-brainer. We see this kind of pattern pretty often already in the Psalms. That the first thing he did was he called on God. He didn't. He realized he had nowhere else to go, and then beginning in verse 3. Excuse me, beginning in verse 3, he begins to ask God for guidance, for direction through this situation. And I think it's important there what David does. One of the things that, in the church, we often sing the old hymn, "Wherever he leads, I'll go." But the truth is, we don't. Let's just be honest. Well, we as long as he leads where we wanted to go to begin with, then we'll go. Same thing we talk about in the church. We want to find and do the will of God. We want to be led by God. But again, only when His will matches up with what we wanted to do to begin with. Only when He leads us where we wanted to go to start with do we usually is more accurate in how we respond to the leadership and the guidance of God. And so David, I believe, here has come to the point, like some of us do, that David is at rock bottom. David has come to the point where he has no other alternative. He is Mark Courts, who was pastor up at Calvary Baptist in Winston for 40, 50 years. Had the privilege of sitting under him and listening to him share his experience. And I've heard him more than once use the phrase, "We're in deep weeds." And I think David realized he was in some deep weeds, and they were all a result. Things were coming again up out of his sin with Bathsheba, and he didn't know what to do now. He didn't know how to get himself out of this mess. And so he comes and he turns to God as he says, "Unto thee, O Lord, do I lift up my soul," in verse 1. He has, again, I think, reached the very bottom of the pit. And so he is clinging to the Lord. He's turned to the Lord for his deliverance and direction in this situation. And so now he begins, it really started in verse 3, but it's even more plain in verse 4 that he is again asking God for leadership. He says, "Show me thy way, O Lord. Teach me thy paths." And so David, again, that's about as straightforward as a request could be, that David is pleading for God to direct him, and he's asking for God's ways. And in other words, we would probably today be more likely to say asking for God's will than God's way. But he's asking for the will, the way, the leadership of God. And interesting, the word show, in that starts verse 4. The Hebrew word there means make me to know. Make me to know. And so it is a word that stresses the very personal nature of knowing the leadership and the will of God, and to teach him his paths. The word teach is very similar there in that it means cause me to learn. And so David is saying, Lord, this is the way I take it, and that David is recognizing, like me, I'll speak for me, and probably many of you, that sometimes we're difficult to teach. Sometimes we're not very teachable. Sometimes we're not willing to listen. And so David says, "Make me to know. Make me see those paths. Cause me to learn." And so it's. Again, it's one thing for the teacher to stand up front in the class and give you all the information, but here David is saying, "Lord, you do what it takes to get it into my hard head, that I will understand and I will accept your leadership." And so he is, he is seeking the guidance of God. He realizes, and here's a key point for us. I think David at this point realizes that he is in the mess he is in because he had left God's righteousness, because he had left God's path, because he had left God's ways, and that was the reason that he was in the situation he was in. And so David realizes, now, if I'm going to get out of this mess, I've got to get back on God's path and to follow him. And so he says, "Lord, show me your ways. Teach me your paths. Lead me in thy truth and teach me, for thou art God of my salvation. On thee do I wait all day." And so he's wanting, again, to know the path. He's wanting God to help him, lead him in obedience to the commands, to the Word of God. But again, he knows, he understands, I think, at this point, that it is his sin that has caused him to be in this dilemma. So he now needs God's help. "Lead me in thy truth and teach me," he says. And so for me, the image there is David doesn't just say, "All right, Lord, get me out of the ditch and set me up on the road," but he says, "Lord, get me out of the ditch, set me on the road, and then lead me so I don't go back in the ditch." And so that's the imagery that I have. It may not be perfect interpretation of all the language there, but for me, that's an image that I can deal with, that I can comprehend. David says, "I don't want you to just get me out of the ditch and then turn me loose, because I've already seen what my will, what I do when I'm left in charge." And so he says, "Lord, get me out of the ditch, and then I want you to lead me. If I begin to stray off the road, Lord, you get me back on your path, because I know me, and if somebody doesn't watch me, I tend to drift back towards the ditch." I think about Some of you may remember years ago, these kind of things have been replaced now for the thrill rides. People want to be dropped on their head and stuff. But you probably, if you went to Carowinds years ago, you may remember there were two different sets of them. One of them looked like race cars, and then one of them looked like old jalopies, like the Clampus drove on Beverly Hills. But you got in the car and you drove the car, and they had a road that you followed. But down the middle of that road was a metal a metal track, and so you couldn't get off the road. If you veered over, that thing kept you on the road. You could get in it, press the gas pedal, and turn loose at the steering wheel, and that metal track would just guide you all. You could run the whole track and never touch the steering wheel. And that's if you were over there years ago, you saw that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But to me, that's kind of what David is saying. Lord, all right, get my car up out of the ditch, put me on the path, put a metal track down the middle of it so I don't stray again. That's my only hope. David, because of his sin, recognizes his own failures and mistakes. He is stuck in the mess that he has created, and he turns to the Lord and says, Lord, get me out and keep me out. Get me out of this mess, and then help me to stay out of this mess. And so this morning, I think that's a great lesson for us, because most of us, the truth is, we get it. We get in the ditch. And when things, it gets so bad, when we get off, let's just say, God's path, we end up in the ditch. And when, things get so bad, then we'll call out to God and say, all right, help me, God. And God picks us up and puts us back on the path. But before long, our decision making, our choices have got us right back in the ditch. And we cry out to God again, and He picks us up and He gets us out. And we go along fine for a while, and then we end up right back in the ditch. And David recognizes that pattern, and David says, you know what, I don't want to keep having to be got out of the ditch. I want to stay on God's path for my life. And so this morning I would challenge you to take these couple of verses and to look back over your life maybe, and see how many times you've ended up, your own choices, your own decisions end up putting you in the ditch. And God has to come along and rescue you and put you back on the path. And we go fine for a while. I've seen it over the years in my ministry. People will they'll get in church, and they'll do good for a while. They'll be at church every week. They'll be involved in church, working for the Lord, and then all of a sudden they're gone, and their life starts falling apart around them. And the next thing you know, they're calling the church, calling the preacher, calling the deacon, saying, "Pray for me, pray God will help me," blah blah blah, and God will rescue them, and they'll get back in church for a while. And they, might be a month, might be 6 months, might be a year, but somewhere down the road, boom, they go. And we seem to be content with just getting out of the ditch every now and then. I think we need to learn, Lord, put me on your path and keep me on your path. I'm really kind of chasing a rabbit here for a minute, but I think that kind of living, Christian living, has done a great deal to damage the reputation of Christians, damage our opportunity to share the gospel with those around us. They see us not stay on God's path. They see us end up in the deep weeds, to use Dr. Quartz's words, and they see us bounce back and forth. And they don't believe in the genuine nature. They don't believe in the reality of what God's done in our life. And so David recognizes his choices put him in the ditch. He wants God to put him on the path, and then to help him stay there. And so this morning, as we wrap up, I hope you'll think about that a little bit. Think about the path you're on. Does the path you're on find you in the ditch on a regular basis? Or how desperately Do we want to find the path of God, His ways, or are we content to continue to to get in and out, on the path and off the path, and with no consistency in our walk with God? Think about that. I hope it'll help you through today, and we'll see you back here first thing tomorrow morning.